Hello everyone, welcome and thanks for joining us as we go into executive session today with Tony Ibarguen, the CEO of Aquaventure Holdings.
I'm glad to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me.
So, Tony, your main platform businesses that make up Aquaventure are a desalinization business and a wastewater business and a point-of-use beverage business. Beyond the fact that obviously the commonality there is that they're all water related, maybe it's some background, give folks a little idea of what makes those businesses complementary and how you try and make them fit together.
Well, thanks. Yeah, that is something we get asked often, so it's a pretty common question. You know, obviously the main thing in common is that we're doing purification of water in a variety of ways, and with the relatively recent addition of the wastewater business down in Texas, we're essentially completing the cycle of life of water, from creating water from the ocean at Seven Seas Water in our desalination business, to purifying it on demand at the last second, making sure that what office workers and commercial users around the U.S. are getting is pure, great cold water, or sparkling or hot at the very last moment. So we filter it right on demand at Quench in the point of use business. And then, sometimes we don't like to think about it, but ultimately the water that we use in its variety forms and toilets and whatnot has to be processed before we can reintroduce it into the environment or reuse it for other things. So that whole life cycle is really the theme that holds it together. And this goes back a little bit to our history. Our founder, Doug Brown, started his career coming out of MIT building desalination plants in Africa and other parts of the world with a company called Ionics that had many of the same divisions. He ultimately ascended to run that company and sold it to GE in 2005, and a couple years later came up with the idea of partnering with a local Philly firm called Element Partners, who've been great private equity partners for us through the years, to then acquire smaller platforms that we have subsequently built into the company that we are today.
Yep. And you have, in addition to organic growth, it's been pretty obvious that a lot of the businesses come through M&A. So one interesting thing for folks might be to talk a little bit about how, as a management team, you try and balance trying to retain some elements of the entrepreneurial spirit that made a company so successful and attractive for you to want to buy them, against trying to have those folks feel and act like team members of a larger company once you do bring them in.
Yeah, that's very important. If we take the example of the acquisition in November of AUC Group in Houston, that was a terrific company. Actually, a local Philly firm called Argosy Capital was their private equity backer. We bought it from them, and they had done a nice job of developing them, and so we love the management team and the whole business, and so we acquired it lock, stock, and barrel. And Todd Mueller, who's the CEO down there, is staying with us and has rolled over into our team. But I will say the majority of our acquisitions, and it's probably 32 now since 2010 or so, that we've acquired at both Seven Seas Water and at Quench, excuse me, are, we're not buying whole businesses usually. We're buying, in the case of Seven Seas Water, we're buying an existing plant that might already be creating desalinated water for its particular off-taker or users. And so we're handling, taking care of all the people and keeping them all, but it's a separate operation. At Quench, it's a little bit unique, but in the business of water coolers and filtration devices, we're really buying specific cooler assets and contracts. And then we'll hire the technicians that know the install base in a given city well. And then from time to time, we will, if the entrepreneur who's selling the business is interested, we'll hire that person to come onto our staff. And we have a number of our senior leaders who were, in fact, owners at a point in time, and for a variety of reasons, after, say, 10, 15 years, decided to sell the business and come and join us as part of our team. But not always. Sometimes it's a division that we're just buying the assets of. And one of the keys then in maintaining the business and sort of the flow of the business, and most importantly, the relationships with customers, is we do a really great job of integrating those businesses. So I'd say the deal business, getting a deal done, the acquisition piece is really a lot of fun. We have a great dedicated team led by Todd Peterson here in our office at Quench. but making sure that we are ingesting the information about the customers and the units and the team, training the team. We've gotten to the point now where literally we'll close an acquisition on a Friday. Saturday, our M&A and integration team will spend the day here making sure all the data is brought into our system. So Monday morning, this just happened with Carolina Pure last week and Ibarguen about a month ago. The very next Monday, when a customer of that company calls the 800 number they're used to calling, it's going to land in our call center here in King of Prussia. And our team will answer the phone as Quench, but we'll see that it was an Ibarguen or Carolina Pure customer. We'll welcome them to the family of Quench customers, which now numbers over 50,000 around the country, explain that the deal just happened, take care of whatever service requests they have, dispatch a technician if necessary, and that tech goes out with our technology and the service is completed. So being able to deliver that service without interruption really ensures that we maintain the quality of service and the relationship with that customer. That's really important as you're making these deals.
Sure. So you talked about the acquisitions and about the growth of the company, and your two main platforms, Quench and 7Cs, were started by you and your colleagues, the current management team, almost from scratch and grown and taken public. What might be interesting for people to hear a little bit about is obviously there's an awful lot of heavy lifting and challenges that go from getting something from there to here. Are there a couple of specific strengths or characteristics that you think the management team that's developed to really help them persevere through all those challenges?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's a lot of little things, but I will say that when Doug brought me in to work with him on Quench specifically back in 2010, the vision that we shared that really set the foundation for this was that we were in both the desalination space and point of use, and generally in water purification, in an area that was easy to get inspired about. From a mission standpoint, there was great passion around being able to deliver an essential service to people, not just here in the US, but globally. We have operations in 10 other countries. And so from there, you start with that, and then with an idea that, we're not doing this just to, buy it, fix it, and flip it. We're not doing this just for financial improvement, though clearly we have investors that we're trying to make money for, and now shareholders. But if you can mesh those things together as you think about the future, then the next thing becomes hiring a team of people and bringing people on who share that. And some of the folks Tom Breslin, Todd Peterson here at Quench, and down at 7Cs Water, Olaf Krogh, Fred Hung. These are people who are passionate about what we do, who have all been involved in and oftentimes run significantly larger enterprises. And so from the very beginning, we had a sense of, hey, we're creating platforms that are intended to grow. And I'll point out one key thing, which is our investors understood that and committed to it. Even though oftentimes private equity has a particular time frame to create a return, we were able to partner with folks who shared our longer term vision that might go beyond their period, so that we weren't always constrained by having to squeeze to make profit and cash flow today, but rather reinvest anything that we're making back and continuing to grow the business. And this is a capital intensive business that requires a lot of capital. We don't sell things. I should have mentioned that at the top. One of the common things of all of our businesses is that we own the asset that creates the water, and we sell the water to the customer. So the customer doesn't have to worry about owning it, maintaining it, making sure the filtration works, anything that breaks, they don't have to hassle with. We take care of everything for them, and they have a nice subscription essentially to great clean water all the way through. Well, hiring those key people then attracts other key people, right? A people hire A people, B people hire C people, that sort of thing. And that's really been the key to being able to scale smoothly, and going from here at Quench in 2009, the year before I got here, I think we did 10 million in revenue. This year we'll do 110. Overall, taking AVH public and being able to accomplish what we've accomplished, including I mentioned earlier the recent additional offering that we just successfully raised another $75 million. So this is all a function of that team, who are all equally committed to the mission and what we're trying to accomplish.
Terrific. You mentioned, as so many other companies do, that you operate in multiple countries now, and in your portfolio of 10 countries, maybe unlike some other businesses, a lot of these geographies that you operate in are smaller, less developed, perhaps less stable economies in some cases. Talk a little bit about, obviously there's legal framework, it's different, and many things in those countries, but there must be some interesting challenges that as a C-suite that you have to manage with a portfolio of operating geographies like you have.
You know, Brian, I love that question because, and I get that one often from investors too, I think there's a uniquely American view that, you know, we are the biggest and the most successful market in the world, and there's a certain security and safety in the rule of law and our government, and the way capitalism works here for all of its quirks, you know, is a pretty successful platform for growth. And indeed, you know, over half of our business is here in the U.S. But there's a little bit of a misconception that some of these other places are by definition, therefore, maybe a little bit riskier and a little bit more dangerous. And I'd say, you know, Doug, I mentioned, started his career kind of doing plants in Africa and with a company that did international business. I've worked in several businesses going back to IBM and Tech Data and others that had huge operations outside of the U.S. And so we're bringing a point of view from the top that says, look, these are opportunities for us to take care of our customers in those markets. And given that it's an essential service, it tends to be something that even in a, you know, even if there were an unstable situation, this is not something that you mess with, right? Your people need water. And so we are great at partnering in our communities. We reinvest back into our communities, and we're viewed as a real partner to whoever the off-taker is, whether it's a government or an industrial user. Having said that, the majority of our operations are in the Caribbean, and this is, you know, the United States Virgin Islands, the British Virgin Islands, Dutch St. Martin. So you're talking about, yes, developing independent governments and developing economies, but they're also backed by, you know, pretty successful large entities that are going to take care of things in the event that it's necessary. We have a great example in the hurricanes that hit us in October of 2017, Irma and Maria, back-to-back, 2 Cat 5s within a week. And they ran right over a lot of the core of our operations in those islands. And in some cases, places like St. Martin are still recovering from those hurricanes. But it was amazing how quickly the supporting governments that bear their names, you know, came to support not only the immediate needs of emergency, but also the recovery and the rebuild of the island. So here we are, you know, less than 2 years later, and most of the tourism and the economies are back up to exactly where they were before. Within that, I'll also note that the nature of our business in these islands typically is running a desalination plant, creating the water for distribution by the utility or for use by the industrial user that's our client. We were up and running within 72 hours of all of these devastating events that happened, and so the nature of our business helps us to do that. I guess if I were to take your question a little bit differently, you know, would we go into, we've been public about a deal in Ghana, for example, West Africa, country not very well known to many of us here in the US, but a perfectly stable, democratic, capitalist society that has had great success with other foreign investors in doing and promoting business and economic development. And water and the creation of water is a great developer of the economy. If you think about that, business and people, new locations as you grow in the population and as more people come to your city. In this case, it's Accra, the capital of Ghana. There are parts of it where they're still, you know, walking a mile to be able to get access to clean water. Bringing water to those people is a great thing that the government is doing for them, but it also promotes new business and new formation of communities. And so that builds on itself as something that then locks us in as an essential service and partner, rather than being simply a vendor that maybe at some point in time they can cut off or not pay.
Yep, that makes sense. Tony, you talk both with business partners like us and publicly about Quench values and other aspects of your corporate culture. Let me tell our viewers a little bit about what that means to you and what do you think is so important about having a corporate culture that really sets a tone for the company?
So that's a great question, Brian, and really important to the development of our business is the fact that we care about culture. There's a tie-in to our mission, which we spoke about earlier, but importantly, people want to work with other great people. It's not that complicated, and at the end of the day, we're trying to hire for and build with people that we enjoy being with. If you think about the number of hours that we spend with each other in the office workplace, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that if you can find a way to attract and retain fun, great, balanced people, that is going to rub off on other people and end up leading to a productive, fun workplace. We have actually taken the name Quench and turned it into a term that we use called Quenchy. And it's, you might have seen it, it's all over our walls, and quenchiness is the characteristic by which most of our people get recognized and rewarded for their they'll do a great job and great performance, but most of the time when we're reading off the Employee of the Month or whatever it is, it's, this person is really quenchy, and it's sort of a thing that we define as going above and beyond, not just accepting sort of it is what it is, but rather trying to take ownership over issues and doing that for our customers first and foremost, but also for each other as teammates, and then ultimately for our investors. Demonstrating positivity is our second one. I like working with positive, people who are moving and growing and developing. It just, again, that kind of builds on itself. And so being positive, being reliable, honest, basic values like that are important to us. Positivity is probably the most. And then ultimately, having the ability in what we deliver in service to our customers to also have balanced lives ourselves. Ensuring that people in a stressful, service-oriented business like ours, where, with 50,000 customers, there's a few hundred every day that are going to call in and something isn't going right or they wouldn't be calling. And so being able to kind of take that in and do it in a way that is exactly the way you'd want to be dealt with on the other side of the phone. If you had an issue, if your water wasn't working, being able to train people to kind of think and articulate those thoughts and be sympathetic is coming from a place where, your life is good. I enjoy coming to work on a Monday morning. I enjoy going home, that night and being with my family and doing whatever I'm going to do. And I can balance those two things. And then we try to have a lot of fun doing it. We try to run a lot of activities, we take trips together. We have a new initiative called Quench Cares, where we're out in the community. We happened to be recently on a trip recognizing our top performers in Puerto Rico, which was where I grew up, which was also hit by those hurricanes and still recovering. And I was very proud of the fact that 100 people volunteered to, instead of spending the day on the beach, to come and help me repaint the school and clean things up. So that's quenchiness. That's the sort of thing that we're trying to build. And that's Quench, but that's also true at our Seven Seas Water. The ability for that team to rally around the hurricanes and help our teammates who are on the island, the money that we donated, the time and effort, the volunteers who went to help rebuild the islands, makes us really proud to be part of this fund.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So Tony, you've been a CEO at various different businesses for the better part of 15 years now. Maybe talk a little bit about what are some of the challenges and things that a CEO has to deal with that are different today than they were 15 years ago?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. If you think back to early 2000s, and I was in leadership roles in public companies in the late 90s even, so it goes back a little bit further. I remember when one of our head of HR at a business I was running in '98 was going to have a baby, and he came to work with a beeper on. Which up until then was sort of the thing of doctors and maybe a field technician or something. And I said, what's with this? And he just said, hey, I feel I need to be more connected to what's going on at home in order to be able to do my work well. And then shortly after that, the beeper becomes the BlackBerry. And then we all had BlackBerries, and we're all fascinated with communicating over this thing. But it was sort of a sideshow to the core business. Well, fast forward 20 years later or so, technology and the ability to communicate the way we do today is at the core of what we do. Our In our business, because our units out there in the field work without necessarily being connected to the core system, right? They're independent plants and operations and water coolers. Our core ERP system doesn't necessarily, if it went down, it would be bad. We wouldn't be able to service customers or bill for a few days or whatever it might be. Email and the communications tools, we use Microsoft Teams to communicate across the enterprise, is really the core application that is the lifeblood of the business. That's a big change. That's a big change. And if you think of the role of a CEO as the setter of the tone, they say tone starts at the top, as the decider of, or at least the providing direction around vision and strategy. This all is a function of communications, and the ability to articulate that has changed dramatically over this period of time. I'd say the other kind of parallel to that is I've also had the privilege of sitting on a lot of boards of directors of public companies, now even the Federal Reserve Bank in Philly. And I've been a director on public company boards since '98 or so, and that has changed quite a bit. Directors back in the day, particularly public companies, were a little more laid back and generally sort of comfortable with management reviewing things and doing what they needed to do, providing guidance and support as appropriate. Directors now are fully liable and importantly involved in setting the tone and the strategy with the CEO. The transparency and a very valuable change is sort of the cleanliness and plain-spokenness of the communications that we make with investors publicly. A lot of this runs through the directors and is the tone that is set by directors. So I'd say overall business has significantly improved as a result of both of these big trends of being able to communicate more ubiquitously over the new technologies, and also the transparency that new governance models have provided as leaders of business.
Tony, like many CEOs, you're obviously plenty busy running this business and growing it, and have plenty of other things that you're involved in as well. You mentioned some boards of directors and things you like to do in your personal life. How do you manage your time? How do you try to find a way to balance all those competing interests and still find a way to feel like you have some balance in your life?
Yeah, great question. It's an ongoing challenge for sure, and one I relish. It is something you develop some skills around over the years, and I think I'm continuing to improve and learn how to continue to improve, but I'm getting better at it. And a lot of it has to do with having the right people around you who you trust to be able to do a lot of the work that I might have had to do previously myself. If I consider here at Quench, from when we started, and we had maybe 100 people, and now we're over 500, the role by definition has to change. There's no way that I can have my fingers in all the different pots that were out there back in the day. And so making sure that I have the right team in place, ensuring that we have the right what I call management systems, the cadence of meetings and communications, the proper expectations for how things get done, which, as we talked before, increasingly now can be done electronically. That's been a huge benefit to me. I have such a great team here at Quench and at Venture that enables me to be able to travel to the various other responsibilities I have, or for that matter, for Venture to be able to travel to Europe to visit investors or go other places, means for a number of days the business is going to be operated successfully by the team, but I'm also a text away or an email away from being in touch, or a phone call away, although less and less these days, I guess, is the phone call. I don't know, how do you do it?
One thing you just mentioned that really resonates with me is relishing the opportunity and the challenge, to the extent that it is, to try to balance all these things. Because a lot of the things you just talked about are things that are very important to me as a CEO, but me as a husband, me as a father, me as a community leader, and things that I really get happiness from in all of those different roles. So there are plenty of things that get on my schedule and occupy my time, whether it's all the things one would expect with being the CEO of a business, an acquisition we did last year, and trying to bring all those things together. Being on some boards, work with the United Way and some other community groups, and having 2 kids that I love and a wife that I love, and trying to spend fun time with them, be at their events, and just be present with them when I am physically with them, and I feel like an important part of their lives.
Yeah, that's a key. That's a key, is when you're there, be there, and
exactly.
And put the phone down occasionally.
That's right. It's even
make sure you're connecting.
Part of the benefit of technology and all the connectedness it allows also brings challenges too. And I agree with you. It's empowering to me and enabling, and 90% good. It allows me to do a lot of things.
I'll tell you, one of the things I've learned and I've been improving on is being more open with my team that their hours and my hours may not match. If we have a relatively young mom who needs to leave at 5 o'clock, but is in a position where she feels necessary to kind of add a couple of hours later on, that's okay for her to do to some extent, and we should accommodate that. And therefore, kind of the old days of FaceTime of who's here at 6 o'clock is who's going to get promoted next. You really have to kind of retrain yourself to think about how performance is not measured by the time that you're spending in the office doing the job, particularly given the tools that we have, and up to and including the fact that if I happen to be up at 10 o'clock and I'm on email doing emails, I'm careful to make sure to communicate in that, hey, I don't expect you to read this now, and hey, I know you're on vacation, please don't read this, but if you see this, if you're even tempted to read it, put it down. This is okay, but I want you to know, so when you come back next week, you know that this is going on, and I'm keeping you in touch with what's happening.
Yep.
But carving out time for family has always been essential to me to have balance. I will never give up cherishing the number of years when I was able to coach my twin boys in Little League, or spend time with my daughter in any variety of activities, and with my wife traveling the world. We're going to carve out a couple weeks to go to the shore in a couple weeks, and I think you have to do that. And as a leader of an organization where you're telling people, hey, it's important that you have balance in your life, you can't get away with not having balance in your life.
Yep. And if you're lucky enough to have a spouse and a family that understands that there's a lot of things in play, they can be pretty understanding and flexible and forgiving of when there's interruptions that they know you wouldn't allow for if you didn't have to allow for them.
Yep. Couldn't do it without Susan, 31 years in July, so that's
terrific. So Tony, the aqua venture companies, and perhaps most especially here at Quench, have been quite active in mergers and acquisitions, and in fact just another one this week, congratulations. Talk a little bit about what some of our viewers might find most important in your view about trying to set the right tone with the acquired companies once they come on board, and making sure they have the right expectations for what will make them successful when they're part of the Quench team.
Yeah, excellent. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know you just successfully bought a company as well. I think it starts back with what is the process by which this came to pass. There's a brokered process. There's an intermediary where they're running an auction, and the job of that person is sort of to be the gatekeeper and to manage all communications. And I find those difficult. Whatever the positives might be in terms of the ultimate value extract for a seller, the inability to connect directly, personally, and build a relationship with the seller for me as the buyer, or vice versa when I've done the reverse in my career, is really challenging. And so we do our best to avoid auctions and broker transactions. In fact, at Quench, 24 acquisitions maybe that we've done on this side of the business in the last 8 or 9 years, we've only done one where it was through an auction process. The other 23 were largely a function of relationships that I had, or Ted Peterson, who runs our M&A group, had developed over the years of being in the industry. And this is the result of many years of coffees and lunches and dinners, meetings at trade shows, visits. Whenever I'm traveling to visit an investor, I try to go visit one of our dealers or somebody else who in the future might be a potential acquisition candidate, just for the sake of saying, hey, this is not just a cold name on LinkedIn or somebody over on the other end of an email or the phone, but somebody that I've interacted with. Once you are able to do that, and I can tell you stories of people who were absolutely not selling the business for absolutely the right reasons, and then some number of years later, circumstances changed, and they hearken back to that investment that we made originally in building that relationship. And then it's a one phone call, hey, I'm ready to go. I'm not going to talk to anybody else but you. Now, how does that play into later? In order for the leader of an acquired acquisition to fit into the buying company, if in fact that's the plan, and we often ask our selling owners and leaders to stay, they've got to feel comfortable having been fully in charge with the idea of, I'm not really fully in charge anymore, and therefore I've got to trust my new leadership team from whom I'm taking direction. And that doesn't happen in a 3-month auction process. And so it has helped a lot that we enter in that process, and particularly when I have the opportunity to lead it, I often enter in with, what are you personally trying to accomplish? How can I advise you, having acquired many businesses over many years, on how I can help you accomplish this, either as an advisor, as a friend, as a mentor, or as the actual person who's going to write a check and then ultimately be your employer. And by starting there and proving that you're sincere about it, then I think people can trust you as they come into the business. I've had situations where I've said to people, you're not sure, I think I really want you, but you're not sure, so tell you what, stick around for a year. Give me a year. And the promise is, at the end of the year, you have a trigger, I have a trigger. Either way, we're going to have a great dinner, we're going to sit down, we're going to say, do you want to stay another year or not? And I'll accommodate structurally and organizationally, making sure that you feel welcome and productive during that period of time. And if for whatever reason we don't feel good, then there's no harm, no foul. I've stayed great friends with 2 of the biggest of the companies that we acquired who were with us for 2 or 3 years. They wanted to go on and do something else. We were ready for them to go do it. And yet we've stayed great friends because of starting the relationship with that best outcome in mind.
Yeah, it's remarkable. Businesses are so different, yours and mine, but so many parallels, and so much of it around the relationship, and different people have different definitions or connotations to what that word means, but trust that underlies it really is the most fundamental part of it to me. So for example, in the acquisition that we just did, we were fortunate that that principal and I had a relationship. We had known each other for a number of years, even done some work together for a number of years. So by the time we got around to consummating a transaction, we knew each other pretty well. We knew that our philosophies on what having a customer relationship means, how important it is to be willing to go above and beyond for that customer, is how we want our people to treat our customers and feel ownership in that process and in that relationship. So we were fully aligned, but there weren't that many people within our organizations that naturally had much reason to know the other organization, so to speak. So, and we knew that going in. So while the principal and I were, and he absolutely wanted to stay, and we absolutely wanted him to stay, while we were 150% confident in what a great combination this was going to be.
There's everybody else that has to get.
And we certainly, and each and every one of them was a very important asset that we were bringing on board, and this was not a buy and cut kind of a deal. This was a bring it in and grow together, a 1 + 1 = 3 proposition. So it was important that everybody get comfortable and want to be a part of the organization as quickly as we could, although we know that's just the natural evolution over time. So I personally went out of my way to try to be present, be visible, and talk to people, and trying to do some activities to bring the groups together. It was 2 terrific populations of employees and team members and just people. And so we knew that as soon as we could naturally get those people to mesh, they all would feel good about each other. Just if you force it too much, it creates an awkwardness. And so fast forward now about a year, and it's gone fabulously well, and all of those people we did want to stay have stayed and are flourishing, so it feels great. But it all gets back to I wouldn't have had the passion to even want to do the deal, much less invest that much energy in trying to get those people to feel part of the organization if it didn't start with the relationship that the seller and I had. And how important it was from this day. Well, Tony, thanks for joining us today, and thank all of you for watching. We'll see you next time on Executive Session.